各位觀眾，我係張思平，我哋好歡迎大家今日收睇《福從天降》嘅節目。今日我哋好榮幸請到一位對華裔婦女嘅歷史好有研究嘅學者，佢嘅名字就係楊碧芳女士。楊女士你好，好，我知道你寫一本書，呢本書嘅名呢就係美國華裔婦女嘅今昔。咁我唔該請你介紹下呢本書嘅內容好嗎？
我呢本書呢就係用英文寫嘅，係用照片呢就描寫華裔婦女喺美國150年來嘅歷史。咁我就分三段時間嚟講。第一段係講19世紀先驅者同埋有些女仔係被賣嚟做娼妓，同埋商人妻同埋勞動階級妻子日常嘅生活。咁第二段呢，就係講20世紀後，就出現咗有比較多啲嘅喺呢度出世嘅第二代呢。咁佢哋嘅生活又點樣呢？就同時介紹下啲婦女喺呢個時期點樣會開始參加社區活動同埋教皇嘅工作。咁第三段嘅時期咧，講第二次世界大戰後，新移民同埋啲喺呢度出世嘅第二代、第三代嘅婦女咧，佢哋嘅經驗同埋嘅地位有咩轉變？
你提到早期嚟嗰啲華裔嘅婦女係咪？嗰啲困難就係佢哋賣咗去做娼妓，咁佢哋點樣解決佢嘅生活咧？
我哋需要明白咧，就係喺嗰個時期咧，因為好少華人婦女嚟美國，移民嚟美國就男人多，而且喺嗰個時期因為種族歧視咧，啲華人咧男人唔可以同啲西人女人結婚，所以就發現有娼妓嘅問題。咁喺中國比較窮啲嘅父母咧，或者逼要買啲女咧，就運嚟呢度美國做妓女。咁佢實在佢哋嘅生活好慘嘅，唔會話好長命嘅。嗰啲比較有幸運嘅咧，就會俾基督教社區、基督教人士嘅幫佢哋，就教佢出嚟咧，就喺教堂嗰度教佢哋英文啊，同埋生活嘅技能。咁或者遲啲咧，好多會嫁俾其他華人喺美國生活。
咁我知道而家三藩市同埋全美國都好多華人婦女新移民嚟咗呢度，咁佢哋喺而家今日嘅社會係咪容易適應呢？係咪嗰啲困難係咪比較好啲呢？就冇咁多個問題。
咁係，因為如果我哋同以前嚟講19世紀同埋初20世紀嘅時期嚟講咧，當然咧，依家移民到美國嘅生活比較好啲，而且比較適應社會嘅美國社會環境又比較容易啲咧。係有幾個原因。第一咧，美國啲移民規例咧放鬆咗好多，就實際歡迎中國人同埋喺亞洲嚟嘅移民都歡迎佢嚟美國。咁另外咧，其外咧，依家我哋機構方面咧，社區機構咧，好多服務處咧就係為移民服務嘅，譬如講幫佢揾工作啊、學英文啊，有雙重語嘅教育部分啊，教佢啲細蚊仔學英文啊，好多樣嗰啲服務處咧就俾佢哋利用咧就容易啲，適合呢個環境。另外咧，我諗依家種族歧視比較以前好好多，冇咁嚴重。亦都有，但係比較少啲咧。所以中國人嚟美國依家嚟講，移民到美國咧就比較容易啲，
所以容易啲。咁我想問下，係咪有啲問題都係而家都有就係啦？雖然話容易，不過咧，譬如話嗰啲新移民嚟揾工啊，同埋語言方面嘅困難點樣解決咧？
就係因為佢有機構幫佢，但係我哋亦都知咧，好多移民嚟美國依家咧都唔係一定會識英文，又冇咩技能，所以嚟咗美國之後咧，生活好即係揾食方面好困難。 咁佢哋多數咧，譬如婦女嚟講咧，就喺唐人化嘅洗衣啊，同埋洗碗啊各種嘅工作咧，時間方面做工嘅時間方面好長，咁就冇咩精神時間打理家務。另一個問題就係因為兒女有冇時間同佢哋一齊教養佢哋。因為佢哋細蚊仔依家又受咗美國文化嘅影響啦，喺美國生活咧，喺學校受到各種嘅美化嘅教育咧，就同家長距離好多。咁問題方面咧，除咗揾食咧，都有同兒童啊，同埋喺美國嘅適應環境各種嘅問題比較複雜好多。
咁楊女士，你嘅意見係希望點樣可以解決同時會嗰啲交通啊同埋文化方面嘅環境嘅適應啊，點樣可以去解決呢啲問題，俾我哋觀眾知道一下好嘛？
我哋個個都知係，如果係新移民嚟美國，第一咧就係揾食咧，所以就精神方面嘅時間方面都好迫切咧。但係我認為咧喺週末亦係晚頭黑如果有時間，應該抽啲時間同啲細蚊仔接近啲，多啲了解佢哋嘅問題，教佢好好地。另外咧，做丈夫
係就做丈夫嘅都係幫手。
最緊要兩個都係做工，兩個都應該有家務嘅責任，有養兒女嘅責任，教訓兒女嘅責任。咁另外咧，好多社區都有社區嘅活動，係專門係為啲青年同兒童嘅服務，譬如青年會啊、禮拜堂啊，另外好多圖書館啊，同埋公立嘅活動咧，即係。家長應該鼓勵啲細蚊仔多啲參加呢啲活動，會對佢哋會好嘅影響。
咁所以喺而家呢個社會咧，婦女係咪比較容易啲咧？你覺得，在喺美國嘅社會，仲容易生存啲？
比以前好多，都係有問題，但係佢有多啲機構幫佢咧，比較容易好多。
好多咁樣，係啊！我覺得你呢啲意見講好好，因為我知道好多移民嘅父母同仔女喺呢度交通好大嘅問題，因為語言方面係好大，文化方面，你覺得佢點樣教佢咧？就係話係用傳統嘅教法咧，仲係用新嘅美國嘅教法？
係，佢應該了解啲喺美國嘅影響同埋美國社會嘅社會嘅風俗啊，同埋生活方面好唔同嘅，咁佢應該自己學下英文，自己多啲了解美國嘅文化，就或者多啲了解自己細蚊仔。
好，各位觀眾，我哋等一陣間再翻嚟同楊女士用英文訪問。 Angela Chang, it's my pleasure to introduce a historian and a scholar who's very well known for her in-depth studies on Chinese American women. Judy, how are you?
Fine, thank you.
Welcome to Salvation Army's The High Places program today. Can you share a little bit about the book that you wrote, which is entitled Chinese Women of America, a Pictorial Study?
Be glad to. This is a book that covers 150 years of Chinese American women's history. It's broken down to 3 periods. In the 19th century, I talk about the early pioneering women who came across the Pacific Ocean to join the menfolk, and there were few women at that time, and the majority of women during this period were women who were brought here to work as prostitutes because of the bachelor society. But I also go and talk about the daily lives of the merchant wives and also the wives of laborers during the 19th century. Then in the second period, into the 20th century, I talk about the rise of the second generation Chinese women born in America and how their lives compare to their immigrant mother's life. I also go into what I call the social awakening of Chinese women and beginning of their participation in community activities and beginnings of breaks with social restrictions of prior years. And certainly I do talk about the war years and how they helped with the Sino-Japanese war effort in China and also with World War II. The war effort in the United States. And then in the third period, I talk about contemporary women. And here I talk about the post-World War II, the coming of war brides, the coming of increased immigrant wives after the passage of the Immigration Act of 1965, and again, how their lives, the immigrant wives, compare with the lives of American-born Chinese women, how the role of women has changed, what are some of their concerns today, and how they are addressing these concerns.
I myself have read the book. It's very interesting. I'm curious, other than recording the history, what's the purpose of writing this book?
I think I wrote the book primarily because there has been nothing written about Chinese women in our history. And there's a saying that says, those who forget their history are fated to repeat the same mistakes. And I think it's very important to understand where we as Chinese American women came from, what are the patterns of history, so that we can learn to plan for a better future. And I think a lot of our cultural identity and the strengths that we can use in strategizing against contemporary problems can come from the lessons of our mothers. And that's why I think it's important for us to remember our history.
I'm sure our viewers will be very interested in getting this book. Where can they find this book?
Well, it's available at the Chinese Culture Center in San Francisco, which published the book. It's also available at East Wind Bookstore in San Francisco.
I'm also curious, what are some of the contemporary issues facing today's Chinese American women?
It gets more complicated when we see there are increasing numbers of immigrant women as well as American-born Chinese women in contemporary times. So I must say that there's a diversity of background. But let me talk about the American-born Chinese women's concerns and problems in the 1980s. Certainly compared to our predecessors of previous generations, conditions have improved immensely. Opportunities have opened up for Chinese women, not only in the workplace, but things have improved for them within their own communities and in the larger society. But they still, I think, with contemporary life, as other women in America face these problems, they must deal with being a breadwinner, pursuing a career, and perhaps at the same time being a wife and a mother. Now that juggling act is quite difficult for all women, but for Chinese women in particular, being minorities in American society compounds that problem for them. And I think that that is a primary concern and issue that face women today who work at the same time are trying to be good mothers and good wives. There's certainly a generation cultural gap for Chinese mothers and their daughters that have existed with every generation that becomes much more complicated when we think about it in today's terms because of the pressures for conformity and the pressures of the influences that young adults and young children face in schools and in a larger society. Mm-hmm. So I think for mothers to deal with their daughters, it's a very tough situation.
Before we go into the mother and daughter relationship, What are some of the actually solutions for modern day Chinese American women to really try to make it and balance all this, roles that you mentioned, to be a career woman, to be a mother, to be a wife? Do you have some suggestions for these women from your studies?
Yeah, certainly from my interviews with women, because we interviewed 275 women across the country of different backgrounds, and I asked the women who I considered super women, who can do all these things and do it well, how do they do it? How do they succeed at this? And many of them said the key was the husband. The husband has to be supportive, has to help with the domestic chores at home, and has to spend time with the children and be supportive of the wife's effort to make it in a career. I mean, we have so many more opportunities professionally now, that more and more women would like to work and pursue a career at the same time. So the husband has to be supportive. The wife has to set her priorities. She has to be together. She has to know how to balance all of these roles and do it well if she's going to attempt to do all of them. And not all women do it well, and not all women pursue all roles. And certainly more and more women are getting into politics and community activities that were never true of before, and that's more demand on their energy and their time.
That's good to know, actually, that the key factor is to keep the family unity, to have the support of the husband. Judy, thank you for giving us a better understanding of the dramatic change in role of Chinese women today. We understand that 60% of the workforce actually are women and relative to men, and I know they're really grossly underpaid too. And it's important, I think, a community at large, that we understand and recognize the power of women and give them the proper treatment and treat them as equal to men. And it's important also we give them the proper recognition. Thank you again for being here tonight.
知心話，由余卓雄牧師主講。
各位，我哋今晚係聽見過楊碧芬小姐所接受我哋嘅訪問。
As we listened to the interview tonight given by Ms. Judy Yang,
我哋大家都知道啊，華僑婦女
做